One of the things that we realized as we were celebrating Missouri's 200th birthday as a state is that it's hard to generalize about Missouri like you can with some other states. It's got so many different characteristics, it's hard to just simply make any blanket statements about it. For example, St. Louis has the flavor of an eastern city, Kansas City more western, the Ozarks definitely southern flavor. We've got small towns, farm communities, we've got big cities, and a lot of people who come from a lot of different places and cultures. But there is something that we share, a musical tradition that goes way back. In fact, back before Missouri was even a state. And a lot of Missourians don't know that the state played a huge part in the story of how American music came to be what it is today. Now this includes fiddle music, country music, bluegrass, ragtime, blues, jazz, rhythm and blues, rock, hip-hop, and classical. Missouri musicians today continue to create the future of American music. Now the reason is because Missouri is crossroads for cultures where a lot of people over the years have intersected. It's connected by river to most of the United States. Rivers like the Mississippi and the Missouri, the Ohio and Illinois make it easy for people even from the East Coast to be able to get here by river. Anybody heading west went through Missouri, and lots of people arrived to the United States by way of New Orleans and then came up the Mississippi River instead of arriving in New York. The Santa Fe Trail starts right outside of St. Louis, connects us to the southwest, and it's in the center of the country. So as railroads started to develop, a lot of railroads crisscrossed through Missouri, a major rail hub. So this brought a lot of different people through our state, and a lot of them brought their music with them. There were the French in the very early days coming down the Mississippi from Canada, the Spanish coming up from New Orleans, up the Mississippi. And a little bit later, the English, the Scots, and the Irish came from the Carolinas, Kentucky, Tennessee. There were the indigenous people with their own musical traditions who were there even before any of these Europeans arrived. Freed slaves coming up from the South after the Civil War, and of course, the great migration of African Americans from after the First World War, and particularly after the Second World War, coming to northern cities from the South. And they all brought their music with them, and that's important. And it was that mix of music in this melting pot of Missouri that was the setting for the creation of American popular music. Let's start out with fiddle music. Did you know that Missouri's official instrument is the fiddle, and it's the only state in the union that actually has an official musical instrument? It's a good instrument to carry if you're on the move, floating down the river in a canoe, coming across the land in a Conestoga wagon, one step ahead of the law maybe. It's portable. French were the first to bring the fiddle music to Missouri, and their culture took hold in the area along the Mississippi, south of St. Louis particularly. The Lewis and Clark expedition included two members who were avid fiddle players. They played their music, mostly reels, and these are recorded in the diaries. In fact, it's even reported in the logs that the expedition and Native Americans would have jam sessions together. And of course, when this happens, both sides influence the other, and something interesting comes out of it. The next wave of fiddlers after the French included British, Scottish, and Irish immigrants settling more in the southern and mid parts of the state, German immigrants settling along the Missouri River, and of course Native Americans and slaves, freed slaves, who took up the instrument as well. And it's interesting that there are three geographic areas of fiddle playing in the state of Missouri, each with its own style. There's the Ozark Style in the southern part of the Missouri. That's called, and I love this term, jiggle bow. Jiggle bow, jiggle bow. Short bow, hoedown, really good for dancing. There's the Little Dixie style in central Missouri. The Little Dixie style is smooth style of playing with longer bow strokes, good for waltzes and polkas. And then the northern Missouri style, the northern part of the state, there's a very clean style of bowing, so it could work with hornpipes and reeds, because they were playing with a lot of people who were playing hornpipes and reeds. Which takes us to country music. Originally called hillbilly music, some of you might even remember that. It originated in the South back in the 1920s with its roots in fiddle music, blues, and folk. Now, country music later became called simply country, and it started gaining popularity in the 1940s with the help of radio. A man from Independence, Missouri, Ralph Peer, played a large role in the development and popularization of country music. And in 1920, he took a job with OK Records. Remember those? Maybe you've seen them in vintage shops in cardboard boxes with the OK label on them. He worked in New York, supervising the recording of Crazy Blues by Mamie Smith, and then going on to record jazz, blues, and gospel music in New Orleans. Well, in 1927, while searching for talent to record, he spent 2 weeks in Tennessee and discovered and recorded Jimmy Rogers and the Carter Family. Big discovery. In fact, he's credited with the first country music recording Little Old Log Cabin in the Lane by Fiddle and John Carson. As I said, radio played a big role in spreading country music, and KWTO in Springfield, Missouri was among the first. Its live performances of country music began in the mid-1930s, and its popular Ozark Jubilee began in 1955. It was carried live on ABC TV around the country. In St. Louis, KXOK featured live country music performances from stars like Eddie Arnold in 1938. And Branson began developing into a tourist destination after the 1907 publication of a book called The Shepherd of the Hills by Harold Bell Wright. It was a novel set in the Branson area. This novel just took off. People got curious about Branson. They wanted to see the places described in the book. And with so many tourists down there, a music scene in the middle of Missouri developed in Branson. And as we know, the rest is history. Country stars like Boxcar Willie, Sons of the Pioneers, and Roy Clark moved to the area. Silver Dollar City and Shepherd of the Hills Theater and Park were created. Here's a big name, big Missouri name, Porter Wagner. He was born in West Plains, Missouri, southeast of Springfield, and his first band was called the Blue Ridge Boys. In 1951, he performed on WKTO in Springfield, and he was featured on the Ozark Jubilee before joining the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville in 1957. Maybe some of you remember the Porter Wagner show, seen over 100 markets, and he had a very special guest star who appeared regularly with him by the name of, that's right, Dolly Parton. She was a featured artist with him from 1966 to 1974 before striking out on her own. Dolly Parton. Bluegrass. Bluegrass came out of country music. Bluegrass is a genre that was created by Bill Monroe and his band, the Bluegrass Boys, in the mid-1940s, known for fast tempos, and also the character of each member during a performance of a song plays a solo. And usually the instruments that are featured in bluegrass are mandolin, banjo, guitar, bass, fiddle. As I say, each one takes a solo, and it's very lively and an extremely popular form of music that has gained a lot of popularity since then. Missouri has many excellent bluegrass bands, holds many bluegrass festivals around the state, which are acknowledged and visited by people from all over the United States. Banjo player and fiddler John Hartford, who grew up in St. Louis, included bluegrass in his repertoire and made many television appearances during his career, popularizing the music around the country. The Dillards from southern Missouri brought bluegrass to national audiences with their appearances on the Andy Griffith television show. Their performance of Feudin' Banjos on a 1963 episode was the first major airing of a song later known as Dueling Banjos. Rhonda Vincent, born in Kirksville, raised in Green Top, Missouri, is a fifth-generation musician and is known as the Queen of Bluegrass, for good reason. She and her band, The Rage, are now based in the Lake of the Ozarks area. Rhonda has received many awards, including Female Vocalist of the Year several times, Entertainer of the Year, a Grammy, and was made a member of the Grand Ole Opry in 2020. Which takes us to Ragtime. Missouri has played a huge role in the creation and dissemination of ragtime, a style of music that emphasizes syncopation with the accent on the normally weak beats of 2 and 4 in 4/4 time. So that would be sort of rather than the normally strong beats of 1 and 3. So it would be boom, boom, ba boom instead of boom, 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 boom. I think, if you can follow me, if I got that right. Don't try that at home, all right? Scott Joplin, known as the King of Ragtime, came to Sedalia in the 1880s, played the piano, gave lessons, composed music that became known as ragtime. His first big hit was the Maple Leaf Rag that was named after a club in Sedalia. We politely say club. In 1901, Scott Joplin moved to St. Louis to be near his publisher, John Stark, who had first heard Joplin in Sedalia and published his music. Sheet music from Missouri spread this new music around the country and around the world. In addition to Scott Joplin, Missouri ragtime composers are Tom Turpin, Joe Jordan, Louis Chauvin in St. Louis, James Scott in Kansas City, John Boone, known as Blind Boone, in Columbia, and maybe some of you remember the late Trevor Tichter. He was a ragtime pianist, particularly popular in St. Louis. He led the St. Louis Ragtimers, who played and toured for over 50 years, beginning in 1961, a real institution, particularly in St. Louis. The Sedalia Ragtime Festival's been going strong since 1974. The same year the movie Sting used Joplin's The Entertainer as its theme. You remember that one, reviving the genre for the public. And of course, everyone loves the blues. The blues has played a large role in American popular music, has influenced music around the world. The most famous blues song, and the one most recorded, is St. Louis Blues, written by W.C. Handy, who is, and this is true, is actually inspired by a real-life event. He heard a woman in St. Louis on the Mississippi riverfront tell him that her man's got a heart like a rock cast into the sea. And he worked those words, of course, into St. Louis Blues, and they're so famous now. Blues was strong in Kansas City, where their jazz was strongly influenced by the blues. Kansas City band leaders like Benny Moten, Jay McShannon, Count Basie always included blues numbers in their sets. Big Joe Turner of Kansas City began as a blues shouter in the 1920s, morphed into rock and roll and wrote Shake, Rattle, and Roll, one of rock and roll's first songs. In St. Louis, some of the prominent blues musicians included pianist and guitarist Henry Townsend, who lived to the age of 96, and guitarist Albert King, known as the Velvet Bulldozer, because his day job was driving a bulldozer. And of course, jazz is very big in Missouri. It's a uniquely American genre of music, created in New Orleans, but it quickly spread to St. Louis through all the musicians that traveled up the river. And I'd like to dispel a misconception here. The misconception is that the musicians were playing jazz, improvised jazz, on the riverboats when they came, and it spread to the cities. But actually, when they were playing on the riverboats, they were playing a very structured, written out, arranged form of jazz. But when they finished their gigs, they would all get together later and improvise and create the jazz that we know today as improvised jazz. Great jazz tradition in St. Louis. St. Louis has actually been called the city of Gabriels because of all the great trumpet players that have come from the city, especially Clark Terry, Miles Davis, and Lester Bowie. Trumpeter Clark Terry was born in St. Louis, created his first instrument out of a water hose with a funnel on the end. This is true. He played with many greats, including Count Basie and Duke Ellington, and was the first African American in the Tonight Show band on television, where he played for 10 years. He was known for his scat singing, which he called mumbles. Kansas City was connected to territory bands, they were called, jazz bands that played the upper Midwest and Southwest. Kansas City can claim band leaders who were based there for a time. Jay McShannon and the great Count Basie, whose name I've mentioned a few times so far, as well as big name saxophonist Charlie Parker and Lester Young. Charlie Parker was born in Kansas City, joined his high school jazz band, began practicing 15 hours a day. First he wasn't very good, but he got better. He mastered improvisation, began playing in several local Kansas City bands and participating in jam sessions, just kept practicing and getting better and better. He left Kansas City to take a job in the Ozarks, where he practiced for hours every day. He returned to Kansas City, where he played at a very high level, developing new techniques for jazz solos and helping to develop the style of jazz known as bebop. He was known as Yardbird, later shortened to Bird, the bird, because he loved to eat chicken, and chickens were known as Yardbirds. Rhythm and blues is a characteristic music that's very, very popular, particularly in St. Louis. When blues music came into the cities, acoustic guitars were replaced by electric guitars, and blues morphed into what became known as rhythm and blues, often called R&B. Missouri was a hotbed of R&B, especially in the cities and larger towns. One of the pioneers of R&B, of course, was Ike Turner, who came up from Mississippi and played regularly in both St. Louis and East St. Louis and the Illinois side clubs. Anna Mae Bullock came to St. Louis with her family from Tennessee, starting going to clubs with her sister to hear music. She liked the music of Ike Turner. This happened. She commandeered a microphone and sang a song during one of the band's breaks so people could hear her. Didn't take long for her to be the lead singer of the band, the Rhythm Kings. Ike changed her name first to Little Ann and then, through marriage, to Tina Turner. And the band's name became the Ike and Tina Turner Review. After leaving a tumultuous marriage with Ike, Tina became a rock star, a Grammy winner, and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. One of her biggest hits was Proud Mary, sometimes known as Rollin' on the River. Fontella Bass, another great name, grew up in St. Louis in a very musical family, and she began singing with her grandmother at funeral services when she was only 5 years old. She then sang with her mother, a gospel singer throughout the South, and with her brother, who became an R&B singer. While she attended Soldan High School in North St. Louis, she sang at local contests and fairs and worked at the Showboat Club near the Chain of Rocks Bridge. She was heard by singer Little Milton and his band leader Oliver Sane, who hired her to back Little Milton on piano. One night, Little Milton didn't show up on time, so Sane asked Fontella to sing, and she was given her own featured spot in the show. Ike Turner produced a recording on Poor Little Fool, which featured a duet with Tina Turner. Rescue Me, remember that was an immediate hit and reached number 4 on the U.S. pop chart, selling over 1 million singles. She later returned to singing gospel music with her mother and her brother. Rock music started in the United States in actually the late 1940s and early 1950s, combining elements of blues, rhythm and blues, and country music in a style known for a heavy beat and simple melodies. The classic rock band has 2 electric guitars, 1 lead, 1 rhythm, a bass, and drum kit. Classic rock of the 1960s led to many offshoots, including folk rock, country rock, jazz rock, heavy metal, punk rock, alternative rock, and a lot more. In Kansas City, one of the early pioneers was Big Joe Turner, whose long career stretched from the 1920s all the way into the 1980s. And in 1954, as I mentioned, he wrote Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which was made famous by Bill Haley and the Comets and was also covered by Elvis Presley. Big Joe Turner was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. Chuck Berry, of course, nicknamed the father of rock and roll, was born in St. Louis. He played the blues in his teens, played with local bands. He developed a guitar style and showmanship influenced by blues musician T-Bone Walker. In 1953, Chuck Berry joined the Johnny Johnson Trio, starting a long-time collaboration with the pianist who has his own place in rock music history. Johnson's band played a mix of blues, rhythm and blues, ballads, and country, with Berry playing guitar and singing the vocals. As lead singer, his first hits were Maybelline, Roll Over Beethoven, Rock and Roll Music, and Johnny Be Good. He had 2 run-ins with the law, spent 3 years in a reformatory as a teenager and 3 years in prison. After his release in 1963, he had more hits, including No Particular Place to Go, You Never Can Tell, and Nadine. He continued to tour extensively, often traveling solo and playing with local bands. Part of his showmanship included his famous Duck Walk. Chuck Berry was a major influence on future rock musicians, as included in many greatest lists, and entered the Rock and Roll fame in 1986, the first year that it opened. Which takes us to hip-hop. Hip-hop culture emerged on the streets of New York in the 1970s when African-American DJs created a new sound. At block parties, DJs played records 2 at a time, mixing and scratching the records for effect. They talked over the top of the music, a style which later became known as rapping. The new sounds had inspired an acrobatic new dance style known as breakdancing, and rival gangs held dance-offs competing in a non-violent way. Hip-hop culture today, and it is a culture, has four major elements: emceeing or rapping, DJing or scratching with the turntables, breakdancing, and graffiti. Hip-hop music, sometimes called rap music, though rapping is not necessarily a part of it now, usually features a vocal style of speaking or chanting over the rhythmic beats in other music. Hip-hop often includes sampling of music from records of other musicians, and it may include beatboxing or synthesized rhythmic beats. Hip-hop music is very strong in the Midwest, and especially in Missouri. In St. Louis, we've got Nelly, St. Lunatics, Chingy, Toya, just a few of the successful artists. In Kansas City, Tech Nine has been one of the leading artists. Nelly, whose given name was Cornell Irl Hayes, is a rapper, singer, and songwriter who moved as a teenager to University City, a suburb of St. Louis, if you're not from here, with his mother. He formed the St. Lunatics with his friend Allie Murphy Lee, Q-Jan and Slowdown, and his half-brother City Spud. In high school, Nelly went solo, signed with Universal Music in 1999, and released his debut single, Country Grammar, which hit the charts and led to a debut solo album, as well as an album with the St. Lunatics. The album Country Grammar was released in 2000, opening at number 3 in the Billboard 200 charts. It was certified platinum in 2004. Eminem, whose given name was Marshall Bruce Mathers, was born in St. Joseph, Missouri, and spent part of his early years there and in Kansas City before making his home in Detroit. Early support from Dr. Dre helped his career, and by 1999 he had formed his own label, Shady Records, and has subsequently earned 13 Grammys and other awards with some of his songs utilizing an alter ego, Slim Shady. Classical music is more strong in Missouri than many of us might know. There's a great tradition of it here. Classical music lovers in Missouri enjoy a strong array of orchestras, choruses, opera companies, chamber music ensembles, soloists, and educational institutions. Some of the earliest classical music heard in Missouri was performed by musicians playing for family gatherings and community events. Singing societies, including German societies in St. Louis, became popular in the 1800s. The St. Louis Symphony was formed out of the St. Louis Choral Society, which began in 1880, making the symphony the second oldest continuous symphonic organization in the United States. In Kansas City, after several attempts in the 1890s, Kansas City Philharmonic took hold in 1933. Missouri's produced its share of opera singers, including Helen Traubel, Grace Bumbry, Vincent Cole, and Julia Bullock. Baritone Robert McFerrin Sr., father of vocalist Bobby McFerrin, attended Sumner High School in St. Louis and was the first African-American man to sing at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City in 1955. Composer and classical music writer Virgil Thompson, a native of Kansas City, wrote the groundbreaking opera Four Saints in Three Acts in 1934, as well as Mother of Us All in 1947. Missouri schools are nationally known for their excellent music programs, including choral, band, jazz, and orchestra programs in many high schools and colleges, composition programs of the Mizzou New Music Initiative, supported by the Sinkfield Charitable Foundation at the University of Missouri in Columbia. So it's a great tradition for a state like Missouri to have and to share with the rest of the country, actually the world, because through music we're able to communicate in ways that words often fail. It connects regions and races, urban and rural areas. It connects people, changes the way they think about each other. And Missouri has every reason to be proud of its musical tradition.